Think about the last thing you really wanted: a job, a relationship, a lifestyle, something you worked toward maybe for years. Now ask yourself, when did you first start wanting it? And was there a specific person in your life right around that time who already had it? Because there's a philosopher who spent 60 years making a very uncomfortable argument that most of what you want, you didn't choose. You caught it, like a cold, from someone else. His name was Rene Girard, and his idea might be the most quietly disturbing theory about human nature you've never heard of. Girard wasn't a psychologist or an economist. He was a literary critic, and in 1961, reading through the great European novels Cervantes, Flaubert, Dostoevsky, Proust, he noticed something none of his colleagues had named. In every great novel, desire never moves in a straight line. There's always a third person. You don't just want something, you want it because someone else wants it, or has it, or is the kind of person who would. Girard called this mimetic desire, mimesis Greek for imitation, and he drew desire not as a line between a person and a thing, but as a triangle. You, the object, and in between the model. The person who's wanting teaches you what's worth wanting. The clearest example is Don Quixote. Cervantes' knight doesn't form his own desires, he outsources them entirely to a fictional hero from a book he read too many times. His whole identity is borrowed from a character who doesn't even exist. Girard's point wasn't that Quixote is insane, it's that Quixote is us. Most of us just have more socially acceptable models. Here's where it gets personal. If I want something because you want it, we now want the same thing. Which means you're no longer just my model. You're my rival. The very person whose desire I borrowed is now standing between me and the thing I desire. Girard called this mimetic rivalry, and it has one very specific, very strange quality. The rivalry starts to matter more than the object. Two people fighting over a parking space have, at some point, stopped caring about the parking space. The other person has become the point. Watch this happen in your own life, and you can't unsee it. The colleague you started competing with. The friend whose success suddenly made you restless. You didn't want what they had before they had it. You're pretty sure of that. But now you can't stop thinking about it. That's not ambition. That's mimesis. Girard took this further in his 1972 book Violence and the Sacred. If mimetic rivalry spreads through a community, everyone wanting what everyone else has, you don't get a marketplace of desires. You get a pressure cooker. Tension without a release valve. So how do societies survive their own violence? They redirect it onto one person, someone marginal, someone different, someone who can absorb the blame. The crowd that was tearing itself apart suddenly agrees on one thing: it's his fault. The violence lands on one body, and then, strangely, peace returns. Girard called this the scapegoat mechanism, and he found it everywhere in mythology, in ritual, across cultures and centuries. It works because the participants never know they're doing it. They genuinely believe the victim was guilty. A conscious scapegoating is just a lynching. An unconscious one becomes a founding myth. His most radical claim came next. Girard argued that the story of Jesus is the first narrative in history to tell the scapegoat story from the victim's point of view and say clearly the crowd was wrong. Every mythology before the Gospels vindicates the mob. The sacrifice was necessary. The victim deserved it. The Gospels say, he was innocent. You were wrong. Once that idea enters the world, it can't leave. People start asking it about other victims. Were they actually guilty? Or did we just need someone to blame? Girard believed that question is where modernity comes from. The entire arc of human rights, wrongful conviction law, victims' advocacy, the long shadow of a text that refused to let the crowd off the hook. So the obvious question, if desire is borrowed all the way down, is any of it actually yours? Girard's answer is careful. He doesn't say original desire doesn't exist. He says the first step is simply noticing. Catching yourself in the act, realizing you started wanting something the moment a specific person had it, is already a meaningful departure from the default. He also described what he called non-rivalrous models. People whose desire doesn't generate competition because what they want isn't diminished when shared. A teacher whose joy in your understanding doesn't threaten their own. These people are rare. They tend to be the ones you remember longest. Peter Thiel has called Girard the thinker who most shaped how he sees the world. You can see it in how Thiel talks about competition, his argument that rivalry makes people stupid, that the best companies stop looking sideways and do something no one else is doing. Whether that's good applied Girard is worth debating, but the uncomfortable part isn't the theory. The theory is elegant, easy to admire from a distance. The uncomfortable part is the moment you start watching yourself, noticing that your ambitions look suspiciously like the ambitions of people you follow, that your taste arrived through models you've never fully acknowledged, that some of your most deeply held goals, if you're honest, began the moment someone you admired already had them. Ren Girard died in 2015. He spent 60 years describing the machinery underneath human behavior, clearly and without much comfort. The least you can do is look.